The sky had turned a deep shade of orange as the sun began to set. It was an unusually quiet evening, and the town felt as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Daniel, a middle-aged man who had lived in the small town for his entire life, stood in front of his son's grave, his heart heavy with grief and unanswered questions. His son, Ethan, had died 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances. The grief Daniel had felt at the time was still fresh, even though years had passed. His son's death had been ruled an accident, an unfortunate fall from a tree. But deep down, Daniel had always felt something wasn't right. The circumstances surrounding Ethan's death had never fully made sense to him. Why had Ethan been in that tree alone? Why had he been so far from home? It didn't add up. He had been told by the doctors and the police that it was an unfortunate event, but there was a part of Daniel that had never fully accepted it. 5 years of unanswered questions had gnawed at him, and today he had made up his mind. Today he would find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Daniel had arrived at the graveyard at dusk, just as the last light of the day was fading. He stood silently before his son's grave, his hand resting on the cold stone. "Ethan, son, I'm sorry I didn't protect you, but I'm going to make it right," Daniel whispered, the words heavy with regret. For years, Daniel had believed he was grieving the loss of a son. But what if the real tragedy had been something even darker? What if the truth about his son's death had been buried? His gaze shifted toward the grave as the weight of his decision settled over him. He had already spoken to the funeral home, made arrangements. He knew it was a controversial move, something that most people would consider desecrating the memory of the dead. But for Daniel, there was no other choice. He would open his son's coffin. He would finally discover the truth that had been buried with his son for far too long. His hands trembled as he knelt by the grave, the cool evening air pressing in on him. He had always believed in the peacefulness of death, in the natural course of things. But tonight, Daniel was determined to challenge everything he had been told. There were too many unanswered questions, too many suspicions. As he looked at the freshly dug earth, Daniel's mind raced. He had waited years for this moment. The pain of his son's loss had shaped his entire life. But now it seemed as though his son's death had led him down a path where the truth was the only thing that could set him free. With a deep breath, Daniel reached down, taking the first shovel of dirt. The smell of earth filled his nostrils as he dug deeper. Each scoop felt like a step toward the truth, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something beyond his control. The darkness of the evening seemed to grow thicker, and the shadows around him felt more oppressive with each passing moment. But he kept digging. The ground felt cold beneath Daniel's hands as he dug deeper. The sound of the shovel scraping against the earth echoed in his ears. It was a strange sensation, one he couldn't explain, a mix of dread and determination. He had never imagined he would be doing this. The thought of disturbing his son's final resting place made him hesitate, but the need for answers pushed him forward. With every scoop of dirt he removed, a knot tightened in Daniel's stomach. What if he didn't find anything? What if all of this was for nothing? But the doubt didn't stop him. It was too late for second thoughts. The mystery of Ethan's death had followed him for years, and now it was time to face it head on. The truth had been buried for far too long. The evening air grew colder as the light faded, the shadows creeping across the graveyard. Daniel paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the chill. He looked up, glancing at the sky. The sun had long since set, leaving only the faintest trace of daylight. He didn't care. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. As he reached the coffin, the unease in his chest grew stronger. The weight of the moment settled over him. What would he find? He had no idea what to expect. With trembling hands, Daniel reached down and began to remove the final bits of dirt. The wooden lid of the coffin slowly came into view. His heart beat faster as he paused for a moment, gathering himself. This was it. He took a deep breath, and with a mixture of trepidation and resolve, Daniel pried open the coffin. The faint smell of decay lingered in the air as the lid creaked open, revealing the figure of his son, Ethan, as he had been laid to rest. For a moment, Daniel just stared at the still body before him. Ethan looked the same, peaceful and serene. the same way he had looked the day they buried him. Nothing seemed out of place at first glance, but then Daniel's gaze shifted. He noticed something strange, something that had never been there before. The tightly clasped hands of his son, once folded across his chest, were now slightly open, revealing a small, folded note hidden inside. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. What was this? Why had no one mentioned it before? Why had Ethan been buried with a note? His hands shaking, Daniel carefully reached for the note. It was yellowed with age, the edges frayed as if it had been there for much longer than the 5 years since Ethan's burial. As he unfolded the paper, his heart began to race. The words written on the note sent a chill through him. Don't trust anyone. They made it look like an accident. I didn't fall. I was pushed. I know who did it. I love you, Dad. Ethan. Daniel's vision blurred as he read the words over and over. What did this mean? Ethan had never mentioned anything about foul play. He had always accepted his death as an accident, or so Daniel had believed. But now, with this letter in his hands, everything changed. It wasn't an accident. His son had been murdered. The implications were terrifying. If someone had pushed Ethan, if someone had been involved in his death, then who was responsible? Why had this information been hidden from him? And why was it left in his son's hands to uncover after all these years? Daniel's mind raced, the weight of the letter sinking in. His entire life was about to be turned upside down. He wasn't just grieving the loss of his son. He was now confronted with the possibility that his son had been killed, and someone had gotten away with it. With shaking hands, Daniel clutched the note to his chest. His mind spun in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and determination. He couldn't let this go. He would find out who did this. The night seemed to close in around him as the reality of the situation settled in. He wasn't just mourning anymore. He was embarking on a journey to uncover the truth, no matter where it led him. The mystery was far from over. Daniel stood there, the folded note trembling in his hands. His son had been murdered, and the truth had been hidden all along. Why? And who? These questions rattled in his head, but there was no time to waste. The night had already grown colder, and Daniel felt the weight of the mystery pressing on his chest. The truth about his son's death had been buried, but now it was out in the open. With a surge of adrenaline, Daniel closed the coffin lid carefully, but his thoughts were already racing. He could feel the unease settling deeper inside him. He wasn't sure where to start, but he knew he couldn't keep this to himself. He had to investigate. The people who had been close to Ethan, the ones who might have known something. Someone knew the truth, and Daniel was determined to find them. The last 5 years, the years of mourning, had been clouded with doubt, but now it all seemed to make sense in a chilling way. Ethan had known somehow that he was in danger. He had known someone wanted him gone. As he stood at the grave, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it a sudden chill. Daniel tucked the note in his jacket pocket and stood up, his mind now more focused than ever. There was no turning back. The next morning, Daniel went straight to his son's old friends and acquaintances. He needed answers. He couldn't just live in a world where everything he knew about Ethan was a lie. Every person he spoke to seemed to hesitate, even those who had been close to Ethan. No one wanted to talk. There were whispers, veiled glances, and deflections, but nothing concrete. Finally, after hours of searching, Daniel found someone who seemed to know more. Sarah, one of Ethan's childhood friends, agreed to meet him in a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. Her face was drawn, tired, and her eyes darted nervously as she looked at him. "You need to be careful, Daniel," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things that have been kept quiet for a reason. You need to stop asking questions. It's not safe." Daniel's heart pounded as he stared at Sarah, a mixture of desperation and anger on his face. "What do you mean?" "Sarah, Ethan's dead. He's gone, and I just found a note from him in his coffin. What the hell is going on?" Sarah glanced around the cafe before leaning closer. Her voice dropped lower. "There's something I didn't want to tell you, Daniel. Something I should have told you a long time ago." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Ethan didn't just die by accident. He was involved with people, dangerous people, people who don't care about anyone, even their own family. He was trying to get away from them, but I don't think he ever really got the chance. Daniel's world seemed to stop for a moment. Dangerous people? Ethan had been mixed up with dangerous people, and Daniel had never known. Who were they? He asked, his voice barely audible as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to form. Sarah looked around again, as if making sure they weren't being overheard. She swallowed hard, the weight of what she was about to reveal hanging in the air. It's his father's business associates. I don't know the full details, but Ethan was caught up in something. He wasn't just a regular kid anymore. He'd been trying to get away for months, but he had too many enemies. Daniel's mind raced. His heart ached for his son. His own father had kept him in the dark, not just about his death, but about the danger Ethan had been in. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. And who were they, Sarah? Daniel's voice grew more insistent. Who were these people that were after my son? Sarah hesitated, her face clouded with fear. I can't say for sure, she whispered, her eyes flickering toward the door. But I know they're still out there, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets hidden. Ethan knew something big, and he paid the price for it. Daniel felt his blood run cold. His son had been involved in something far bigger than he could have imagined. The dangerous people that had been after Ethan weren't just an accident. They were a part of something planned and sinister. Ethan had been silenced to protect the truth. Who were these people? What did they want from his son? And most importantly, how far would they go to keep Daniel from uncovering the truth? The questions flooded Daniel's mind as he looked at Sarah, her face pale and full of regret. We need to figure this out. I can't let Ethan's death be in vain, he said, his voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. Sarah shook her head, a fearful look in her eyes. You don't understand, Daniel. The more you dig into this, the more danger you're in. But Daniel wasn't listening. He had made a promise to his son, a promise he intended to keep. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. Daniel couldn't ignore the urgency in Sarah's voice. She was right. He was getting in deeper, and it was clear that the more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became. But even as the fear gripped him, he could feel the weight of the truth pressing against his chest. He couldn't back down. Ethan deserved answers, and Daniel owed it to him to expose the truth, no matter the cost. After their conversation, Sarah was hesitant to say much more. Her fear of the people who had been involved with Ethan was palpable, and Daniel could see it in her eyes. She was terrified of the people who had silenced his son, and terrified of what might happen if Daniel kept digging. But Sarah had provided him with the first real lead. Ethan had been connected to his father's business, and that was a thread Daniel knew he had to follow. The next few days felt like a blur. Daniel spent hours trying to connect the dots, following up on leads, reaching out to people who had known Ethan. But every attempt was met with resistance. People were too scared to talk, and those who did were vague, offering only the faintest hints. The deeper Daniel went, the more it became clear that this wasn't just some small-town mystery. Ethan's death wasn't an accident. It was part of something far bigger, something that had been buried for years. Daniel's frustration grew with each passing day. He couldn't understand why everyone seemed to be keeping secrets. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about everyone who had been involved in this dark web of lies. One night, as Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the scattered notes and pieces of paper he had gathered, something clicked. There had been a name that had come up over and over again, a name that Daniel had ignored in the beginning. It was Lance Carmichael, a powerful figure who had connections with his father's business. The same name had appeared in Sarah's warnings, and now Daniel realized it was the key to everything. Carmichael was more than just a businessman. He was the kind of man who didn't hesitate to silence people who got in his way, and it was clear now that Ethan had been in his way. Daniel's thoughts raced. How had Ethan gotten involved with Carmichael? What had his son known about this man, and why had it cost him his life? The next morning, Daniel drove to a small, isolated office building on the outskirts of town, where Lance Carmichael's company had its headquarters. It was a cold, sterile building, and the air around it felt suffocating. As he stepped inside, Daniel was met by a receptionist who looked at him with cold indifference. He could feel his pulse quicken as he approached her. I need to speak to Lance Carmichael, Daniel said, his voice steady but firm. It's about my son, Ethan. The receptionist blinked, her face neutral, but her eyes betraying a hint of fear. "Mr. Carmichael isn't available right now, sir," she replied, not looking up from her computer. "He's in a meeting." Daniel didn't back down. He had come this far, and he couldn't let anything stop him now. "I'll wait." The receptionist hesitated but then picked up the phone, whispering something into it. A few moments later, a tall man in a sharp suit walked through the door. He looked at Daniel with an unreadable expression. "You wanted to speak with me?" the man asked, his tone cool but not unfriendly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This was him. This was Lance Carmichael. "Yes, Mr. Carmichael, I'm Daniel, Ethan's father." Daniel's voice was steady, but the weight of the words hung heavily in the air. "I've been trying to find out what happened to my son. I believe you know more than you're letting on." Lance looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice was calm, almost too calm, and his eyes flicked toward the receptionist as if he was giving her a silent signal to leave the room. Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew right then and there that Lance was hiding something. He wasn't going to let this man get away with it. Not this time. "My son didn't die by accident, Lance. He was murdered, and you know it." Daniel's voice cracked as he said the words, but the truth hung in the air like a charged electrical current. Lance's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Daniel saw a flicker of something. Guilt, fear, or maybe anger. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Lance said, his tone now sharp, his mask of calm slipping. "Leave now, before things get worse for you." Daniel stood his ground, refusing to back down. "I'll find out what happened to my son, Lance, and you'll be held accountable." But Lance didn't respond. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the cold hallway. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the man who had been behind Ethan's death was not just a businessman, he was a dangerous man, and now Daniel was in deeper than ever before. The truth was out there, but finding it would come with a price. Daniel left the cold, sterile building with his heart pounding in his chest, his mind reeling. The conversation with Lance Carmichael had confirmed what he had feared. Ethan had been involved in something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Carmichael's warning echoed in his mind. "Things will get worse for you." But Daniel couldn't let fear control him anymore. He was in this now, and there was no turning back. As he stepped outside, the weight of the situation hit him all at once. He had come so far, but now he understood that the road ahead was going to be even darker. The people behind Ethan's death were powerful, and they had no intention of letting their secrets come to light. But Daniel knew he couldn't stop now. Ethan deserved justice. He had been taken from him too soon, and no amount of danger would stop Daniel from finding the truth. His son had left a trail for him to follow, and Daniel was determined to uncover it, no matter where it led. The first thing Daniel did was contact a trusted old friend, Detective James Foster, who had retired from the force years ago, but had always been willing to help when needed. After filling him in on the details of what he had learned, Daniel was met with a surprising offer. "I've heard rumors about Carmichael for years, but no one has ever had the guts to go after him," Detective Foster said, his voice filled with both concern and respect. "I'll help you, but you need to be ready for the consequences. These people don't play by the rules. They'll do anything to protect their own." Daniel nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and fear. But he knew there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out, no matter the personal cost. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Detective Foster worked tirelessly, piecing together the details of Ethan's life and his connection to Carmichael's organization. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. Ethan had been caught up in a world of corruption, greed, and violence, a world that had ultimately led to his untimely death. But just as they were about to confront Carmichael with the evidence they had gathered, things took a dangerous turn. One evening, as Daniel returned home from a meeting with Foster, he found his house ransacked, papers thrown everywhere, drawers emptied, and the house was eerily silent. His heart dropped to his stomach. Someone had been looking for something. Someone was making sure Daniel didn't get any closer to the truth. But that wasn't the worst part. As he moved through the house, searching for any clue, he found a note, a single piece of paper, left on his kitchen table. It read, "Stop now, or things will get worse for you and those around you. You've been warned. Daniel's blood ran cold. The stakes had just risen, and he realized that he wasn't just fighting for his son's justice anymore. He was fighting for his own survival. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't back down. The next day, Daniel received an unexpected visit, a message from Carmichael himself. The powerful businessman who had been behind Ethan's death had arranged for an official meeting. But Daniel knew it was a trap. They weren't going to settle things peacefully. As Daniel prepared to meet Carmichael one final time, he made a vow to himself. He wouldn't leave without the truth, no matter the cost, no matter what Carmichael tried to do to stop him. When they finally came face to face, Daniel was determined to make the man responsible for his son's death pay. The meeting wasn't long, but it was intense. Carmichael, standing tall in front of him, looked every bit the villain Daniel had come to know him as. The confrontation was quick, but brutal. Carmichael did not deny anything. In fact, he made it clear that he had no intention of letting Daniel continue this investigation. But in a final desperate move, Daniel revealed the evidence he had gathered. He made sure the truth was known, even if it meant exposing everything about Carmichael's business to the authorities. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice for Ethan. The truth was finally out. Carmichael's empire crumbled under the weight of the evidence, and the truth about Ethan's death was brought to light. The corrupt system that had protected him for so long could no longer keep its secrets hidden. Daniel had done it. He had uncovered the truth, not just for his son, but for himself as well. Though the cost had been high, he could finally breathe easier knowing that Ethan had been avenged, and the lies surrounding his death were no longer suffocating him.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.